So, yeah, as stated today, we're going to talk about making the harmonic overtone wobbly bass that's heard in a lot of 140 and EDM music. Flutter bass, wobble with a harmonic to it. Yeah, so just gonna show you the tune that I kind of whipped together to demo this. Just made a few versions of the basses here, and then I'll go through how it's all made. So let's start by just taking a listen to it to show you what I'm talking about. As always, got my tune laid out here, and then in the master channel here, I've just got my streaming software down here, and then I've got just a bit of like gain, saturation, and a limiter on the output just to make it nice and loud, sound good. And yeah, let's give it a listen. Here we go from the beginning. Yeah, so there you go. It just plays out for another phase there, another phrase. So yeah, as you can hear, I just kind of whipped together a bit of like a makeshift tune just for a bit of context, and yeah, let's go through it. So obviously to start, I've got kick and bass, just playing a simple pattern here with a shaker. So yeah, but we're going to focus on the bass right here. So we'll break it down to discuss this, how this kind of bass is made. So first of all, it's being played in two different parts, as basses like this often are. It is possible to play like a subpart and a high harmonic part together, although it is also often advantageous to break them up into the high and low parts, essentially. So in that case, and they can also be like here I'm showing they're playing two different parts basically too. So here I've got same MIDI notes for all of them, just playing this in D, and I've got to start with a low sub part here. That sounds like this, just a pure sine wave sub essentially. You can see that here, I'm just using make this a little bigger, just a sine wave and one voicing with really nothing done to it other than I have an envelope here that is going to the distortion. It's just giving it a little bump and drive in the distortion to it, because like you can see for yourself, playing a low note in a sine wave, like a sub, is often very like hard to hear. Like, you can feel it, you can sense it, but it can be hard to hear, especially on smaller speakers or headphones. And so by adding harmonic content to it via saturation, or, saturation past a certain point is distorting the signal. So saturation and distortion is adding harmonic content to that sine wave, which is making it not just a pure sine wave, so it's making it easier to hear. So that's why in a lot of cases they're adding a bit of drive to this. You can hear it's not even that much, but you can hear a little bit of it, and you can see this envelope that's just giving it a little bump in it. It's really nothing that you hear a lot on its own right now, but when it's mixed with the other one, it kind of all just, little bits of saturation and add up. And then there's just the compressor bumping the gain up a little bit here. So sine wave. Oh, and then what do I have here? Oh yeah, and then this is a very small envelope, a very short envelope. You can see it play by here really quickly. Like when I play it here, you can see it flash by on the screen there. And that, as you can see in the modulation matrix here in Serum, is going to the coarse pitch of the sine wave here. And so that's giving it just that little bit of a bend in the pitch that is common for like flare and flavor in sub basses like this. So instead of just the note playing plain, it's playing boom, a little bit of a pitch bend to it. Nothing that exaggerated, but that's just from the adjustment here. If I really dragged it out, you could hear it like more like, yeah, there you can hear it going, down like that, but it's just a real quick drop that just gives it a little bit of movement and a little bit of a sense of impact in a sub when you do that. So yeah, clean sine wave bass here for the sub, and I have that labeled as the sub low part here, and then mixed with the high version, which is the same thing. Oh, I also have a low pass filter, just a low pass filter on this, at like 100, 110, just keeping just the low pass sub there. And then mixed with a copy of it that is running a high pass filter here at 110, but within a high pass to mix with that, low pass sub. And this is pretty similar, except we have a bit of a noise source in there mixed in, which is also being modulated by that same envelope shape that's giving it just a little boost in the noise when it plays. And then the FX, it has just a chorus added to it just for a little bit of pseudo kind of width, of the chorus sound. So that sounds like this. And this is has an amp added to it before that. And then with an amp added to it. And again, this doesn't have to be an Ableton plugin, but anything that is acting as an amp modeling, like a tube amp, I could do that with like the free tube amp plugin from Voxengo, for example, and then just adding, drive to it and changing, the characteristics of it to, give it that characteristic, but or the saturation, audio effect from Ableton would, could do the same thing too. So just a saturation, a amp, boost source. This one, it's just very easy to use, and it gives it that extra edge you can hear. And with the high pass, you can hear it with the sub without. And, that sounds fine. I mean, I have another bass here that is just doing it all together without it being split. But this is just an example of a way to do it that gives you a lot of control, where you have a high and low sub mixed together playing the same note, because then you can just, you can control the parts independently. Like you could really distort the high part and leave the low clean, essentially, or just process them differently, however you wanted. So the two of them together sounds like this then. Oops. And so that's the sub bass that is mixed then with the background of the wobble bass here, the harmonic bass here. And so this bass on its own I say harmonic bass because the whole thing is you're adding a series, you're adding harmonics, you're adding a high note to the low note of the sub. And so the way that's being done here then is a very common way to do this in Serum, for example, is by using this harmonic series oscillator or wavetable, sorry, in the oscillator. That it's a harmonic series, meaning it has a function that you can, by adjusting the wavetable position here, and you can see in 3D as you scroll through it here. But by adjusting the wavetable position, it goes through a preset series of harmonics, and that means there. You see how these two match up? You know, this is just kind of a way to demonstrate it in a sense. You have your first sine wave here, which you can hear is just a low sine with the filter rattling back and forth, breaking it up, and the level being adjusted. But then when it's mixed with the second oscillator, you can see how this flows through into the second one, in this nice illustration of it here. Well, when I crank it up like this, you see how, well, that's doubling the amount of oscillations in it, and then this is adding more. But you see how these are all preset, even additional oscillations like this one. 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 oscillations then in this space. And so what this visually represents is a series of harmonics, meaning essentially matching notes to each other. So then rather than me just adjusting a high note on my own to fit harmonically to match in harmony with this other oscillator, this harmonic series wavetable is just doing that automatically. And as you increase this wavetable position, as you increase the number of oscillations happening in the oscillation window here, it increases the perceived pitch, how high the sound is. So as I play that, I'll turn it up. First, let me just, I will show you what this sounds like. I will, well, this, I have two LFOs here that are modulating the level of this stuff. You can see just turning the level of the oscillators up and down quickly in a loop. If I just turn these up, you can just hear it on its own. Oops, turn the filter off. I've got these effects on. Okay, as I increase the number of oscillations in the window here with the harmonic series, you can hear the pitch going up. Yeah, and you can hear it, it can get quite high up there like that. Anyways, so the idea of creating this harmonic overtone bass is you're adding a high harmonic to the low bass sound that gives it that, like, that ringy sound to it that is really common, in dubstep and EDM, stuff like that, where you hear this high overtone edge over the bass. And so the way we're doing that here is by using this harmonic series set at a note that matches, you can see here. Okay, so that's our chosen harmonic then. And then I have the semitones increased up here to 4 if I do it without it. But then increasing the semitones, you move it up a few notes as well. And so that's the one that I chose. You could change it as well by changing the semitones and overall how high it is with the number of oscillations in the harmonic series here. So I have this set at 4. And then, like I said, I have this set where to give it that wobble effect, we are using an LFO here that is set in the retrigger mode. So when it plays, it retriggers, it plays back and forth, it loops. And I have this curve set up so that it plays and jumps up sharply to the peak and then fades off like this. And it's set at the rate of 1/16th note. So when it's playing back and forth, you can't really hear much because it's just that very low subtone and it's being cut here and when in an EQ anyways. But it does add to the overall body of the sound. So we have that. And then mixed with the wavetable, also receiving the same modulation from this looping LFO here. So you can hear it's getting that. I'm going to turn off the side chaining here too. So yeah, so that's the basis of the sound. You can hear we have our very low sub here, and mixed with our high harmonic. And then they are going through a filter, using a low-pass filter that again is being modulated. The cutoff's being modulated by the looping LFO here as well. A little bit of noise mixed in there. If you remember, noise can often be like an approximation. It sounds like distortion without actually distorting it, because it gives it that kind of buzzy sound of a distortion effect without actually distorting the signal. So that's a very common way to add that crunchiness to a sub bass. So we have a noise source here being modulated by that LFO as well here. And then also mixing in the sub oscillator here as well, just another oscillator. And yeah, then that is going into FX here. We've got hyperdimension, it just gives it a bit of the dimension effect sound here. A chorus gives it a bit of that width sound. And then into distortion, we're using a soft clip at a high level here, so that really accentuates that harmonic overtone by saturating it and distorting it. You can hear as we turn that up. And then into compressor and multiband mode. Oops. Compressor and multiband mode, that is just boosting the gain quite a bit, which goes, again, it's being boosted a lot here. And then going into a bit of a reverb here. The EQ shaping, pulling up the highs a bit and the lows a little bit. And yeah, especially with that EQ, it really pulls that high, gritty, edgy sound of the harmonic up more from the distortion. So yeah, that's it. What's this doing again? LFO 2. Oh yes, and then I also have another LFO here set just to run as an envelope here, so it only triggers once and plays like an envelope, or as an envelope. And this in the matrix is being set to the main tuning, so it is adjusting the main tuning of the synth a little bit, giving it just a little bit of a pitch bend when the note triggers, which again gives it that little bit of sense of movement, just like the little pitch bend added to the sub bass that I showed earlier. Yeah. And so the function of this then to understand is we're making the sub bass a sine wave and adding the high harmonic to it. So that's the high, screechy sound harmonic overtone to it. That's when people say an overtone, that what they're referring to, like a tone that you hear over another one stacked on top of it, an overtone. So like this high extra note that is not playing, because it's this harmonic series, but then playing +4 semitones, so it's playing a different note that is harmony. A harmony meaning it matches and sounds good, plays well with the original, the root note, the bass note here. And then those harmonics stacked together create that mixture of that low bass with that high harmonic, screechy, harmonic sound of dubstep based, etc. stuff. And then giving it that flutter or that wobble movement, rather than just playing it as one long sustained note. Of course, we're just doing that by using an LFO or modulation source here, right, on the level to just turn the level up and down really fast, right, to give it that flutter, that wobble, 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 that back and forth, that wobble. So that's the theory of this kind of bass. And then there's a lot of ways to go about playing with it and messing with it. So I also doing that with just the, let's turn this stuff off for a second. I'm doing that just with modulating the level of the oscillator. You can hear it already. And we've already got that sound. But then accentuating that movement by cutting it up more with a filter here just gives us that additional level of control as well, because we're also breaking it up, modulating the output, volume with the filter. You can change that and stuff and get different results. And then I was using another filter down here as well to further accentuate that, where I have a filter with an LFO at 100%, also playing at a 16th note rate in this ramp down shape, and you can actually see the movement of it here. It's just breaking it up further with that same movement pattern of the 16th note. And yeah, then that is the basic pattern for this part. I also have an EQ just cutting out the lows a bit so that it mixes with those subs before here. So if I play it all together, then the subs and the bass together. Yeah. So that's it. That's the stack of those sounds together. The bass, the low sub with the wobble harmonic, and then with this higher sub bass part in it as well. And yeah, then there are some variations of it and some more ways to play around with it. I'm going to demonstrate and show here. But to do that, I have the sub basses here, and I might actually change these. Actually, I would often do that. The sub bass is here, then this wobble bass here, and that's this part you hear in this drop. So then, yeah, I made a couple variations of it there too. So I just took this bass part and duplicated it for this one here. And in this case, it's the same exact thing, just a different sound stack. So same setup. In this case, I just increased that harmonic series, that wavetable harmonic. I just cranked it up to a higher note. You can hear it as I adjust it and play around with it. You can hear it. So there's like the 9 that we were doing before, and I turned it to 18. And then, so I have that higher harmonic note mixed in with it. And then I changed the distortion from soft clip to downsample to a bit crusher downsampling distortion, and then just found a sweet spot that gave it that interesting sound here. Bit crush, classic. I mean, that adds a lot of harmonics as well, giving that real high sound to it that we hear there. And yeah, so just another variation. Although in this case, I have it stacked with another sub that is doing things a little differently, where I showed before that you can have the sub split between the high and the low parts here, to give independent control. But I said you can also do it together. I mean, here's another sub patch that is the same thing, just without it being split, essentially. Low sine wave and single voicing mixed with noise source here, and just a little bit of modulation here, a little bit of back and forth on these, giving a little bit of movement to the noise, and What else? Just adding distortion to it and a little notch filter. So, you know, just another gritty sub sound. Yeah, so that's just, you know, I mean, pretty similar to this one, right? That one just has a bunch of, you know, some added width to it from that chorus. But this one is just, you know, together. And then I had that low sub stacked with the other wobble here. Yeah, to give it some variation, you know. A third variety, just, you know, another copy that I made. And what did I do to this one? Oh yeah, so in this case, this is where I start to play around with other options. So you saw before, I showed before how we are using these LFOs, looping LFOs here, playing back and forth, looping to modulate the volume, to give that wobble, wobble, you know, the sound. But then in this case here, I'm also changing the rate. In this case, I have the rate set from, instead of playing 16th notes, that even, you know, 16th note pattern movement, instead I'm using the rate mode here, so playing it in hertz, so I'm adjusting the frequency of it, and that allows you to play it back and forth. And I have a modulation knob here set, you know, for the rate of LFO1 here, and then that allows me to play with the speed of that. You know, and then yeah, you can just go nuts playing with that stuff. I just have a bit of automation drawn for that here. Like here, I just ramp up the rate of the LFO a little bit. You can see like that as a placer. You know, and yeah, then that's another way that type of bass sound is played expressively, essentially, is by changing the speed of the LFOs that are modulating the, you know, wobble, the amplitude. They're modulating the amplitude, you know, technically in this case, they're by turning the volume up and down, you know, of the oscillators, by changing the gain, the amplitude of the oscillators, and the filter and all that's good stuff as well. But yeah, same setup here, just playing differently with that LFO speed. And yeah, again, that harmonic, you know. Yeah, and then I made one more copy of it here. Let's put this in a stack here. Made one more copy of the bass here where I just duplicated it again, and in this case just used different distortion sound. Yeah, same harmonic stack and everything, same patch, just using zero square distortion in this case, very aggressive distortion that really adds a lot of, you know, a lot of distorted harmonics saturation to it like this. So just for a different sound, just for a different variety, you know. So yeah, without putting too much thought into it and going too much into, oh, you know, making a real serious perfect tune here, I just did the kind of typical thing that is done, where you would make a patch. You'd say, okay, I have my main, you know, bass here, and then you make a few variations of it, and you alternate between them, and you create you know, variation and flow in your tune that way, and have different stuff to hear now as it goes through. So yeah, that's what I have here as it goes from one to the next to the next. So like in this case, you know, I'm playing around with the LFO speed in this one like going from fast down, ramping it down. I could make that more accentuated if I wanted to. You could go nuts with the automation, like making it jump around a lot. Like that. You know, you could add a lot of change to it by just changing that LFO rate. Yeah. Yeah. And that, like I said, you know, modulating the speed of the LFO that is doing the main modulation for that wobble, you know, the wobble part of that whole bass, or the flutter part of it. That's a main way to shape the expressiveness and design the sound, you know. So again, to reiterate, that is being done by changing the speed, just using it, instead of using it in 16th notes, using it in hertz, and changing the frequency of the LFO that is, you know, looping here. And then as you change that, it will change all of the, you know, the flutter speed of everything in the bass. So yeah, that is basically it, you know. So again, you have a sine wave, you know, sub with distortion, add harmonics, and give it that kind of, you know, like dirty 808, like bow, bow, bow kind of, you know, grit, so that you can actually hear it. And, you know, it just gives it that, you know, that character. And then mixed with a high harmonic series, that harmonic overtone of, you know, that high note mixed in with the wobble, and then stack the two together so that you get a rich and complex bass sound where, you know, you're not just playing it on its own, like if I was just playing, you know, just this wobble on its own, even without the high pass filter, you know, adding that sub to it just does so much, obviously. Yeah. So, yeah. And then to further illustrate that point, again, because I'm, like I said, this is the most common way that you'll see like people on the internet, all sorts of, you know, producers like that doing this kind of harmonic bass, is using this harmonic series. Because again, like I said, it's a pre-mapped, copy of repeating the oscillator in a certain number of times. So it's like a, you know, preset harmonic series that makes it really easy to do this. But another way, I mean, to basically to illustrate and demonstrate like what we're talking about too, I just got some alternate examples here. So like, for example, if I was doing it a different way, just to show, instead of using that harmonic series, here I'm just using another, you know, the saw wave. I mean, this one goes to the end of the screen, but, you know, it's a saw wave. You can see I can select different waveforms here. And instead of using the harmonic series, I can just dial in the harmonic the way I want to then, you know? So again, we have a sine wave here, just playing the same notes with the same filter movement and noise and all that stuff. And then I can add in my own harmonics with just another oscillator. I mean, as you can see, I just have a high note oscillator that's playing octave +4, and then adding 6 semitones where I can dial that in to match, you know? Yeah, so I'm just playing a high harmonic meaning it matches with the root note of, you know, D, mixed in with a sub sine wave as well, doing it without the harmonic series. And then I just have to, you know, tune it myself. And it's essentially, you know, a similar thing, because you're achieving a similar result where you're adding a high harmonic blended in with the sine wave. And if I turn that off and turn this on, how does that sound? I forgot to turn the filter and EQ, the high pass filter or high pass EQ and stuff on here. But yeah, you can hear it's very similar, right? And that's because we're doing the same similar thing, right? Where we're adding a high harmonic note blended with the low sub sine wave here. Same thing. Some of the, artificial width effects here of a chorus and dimension, and then distortion, clipping, and pulling up those harmonics. And then just reverb and, same process here. So yeah, so that's an alternative example. Another one was doing it even simpler with operator, one of the default synths here. Now operator is doing an FM synthesis where it's all stacked together here. So meaning that all these oscillators are modulating each other. They're all stacked and doing frequency modulation for each other. But again, I'm doing the same thing, playing the same notes here and using a low tone sine wave stacked with higher sine waves to produce a similar sound here. If I turn these off, you hear just that sub again, back and forth, adding high harmonics to it. And then using the filter set with a looping, it's synced to loop here at 16th. So again, just breaking it up with a 16th note, looping filter, and yeah, doing the same thing, just using a harmonic stack and modulating the volume via a fast LFO or looping, LFO looping source like that to again get a similar result. So, just demonstrating the theory behind what we're doing rather than just showing you like, oh, use this specific wavetable in Serum as a way to do it. So then you can actually understand how we're getting that result, rather than just, click this in a specific synth. Yeah, another example here then too would be this one where I'm doing even more broken up. Here's just a sine wave. Again, flapping back and forth with that filter, just looping the filter in 16th notes, and then mixed with a high oscillator. Just playing a high note and just a high note, not even, frequency modulation or anything like that going on. Just a high note mixed with a low note. And again, you can see, it's the same fundamental theory as that high flutter overtone sound. So yeah, but that being said, the way we're doing it does sound good in these synth examples. And here's a final example too. I had a harmonic stack to show like how we're choosing the harmonics in that kind of bass here. Here is just a stack in operator demonstrating starting at our low root note, which is kind of hard to hear, but as we stack higher notes to it, so here's our low root note, meaning our bass, our lowest note that the track, is the tune and the pitch of the key, of the track is in. And then here adding a one higher octave up, and then adding the harmonic, in this case, that is the harmony that blends well with it, that we want. I'm adding a higher one, adding a higher, just to demonstrate, like, to illustrate what I mean by the harmonic stack, where you're hearing a stack of notes, high to low, that are stacked on top of each other that give that harmonic series stacked together. And then, as we're, selecting which ones we want, we can make a harmonic stack, that way. That's essentially, like what we're doing with this harmonic series wave or another oscillator doing that in the synth. Yeah, to create that low bass of the root note here, like these low notes mixed with high notes. And in this case, the one that we played and thought sounded good over it, if I do like this, if I play this low note, and then mixed with like, well, what note sounds good? Oh, you know, not that, maybe not that. There we go. Okay. Again, like I've said before, you don't have to know a lot about music theory to just like play notes together and determine like this is the vibe that I want, not that, you know. So yeah, that's how we're choosing the harmonics that we're stacking together to make that sound. And that's what we got going on here then in this bass sound like this. You know, you can hear those harmonics stacked together. So yeah, then to just, you know, play more with context with this bass sound, I have it combined with the drums, you know. The kick and snare I went through before, it's pretty simple. I'm just using samples in this case, just to allow, you know, kick and snare sample. Playing a basic pattern with a shaker sample, you know, pretty straightforward. And then the bass here, I am sidechaining, of course, here. So different examples of sidechaining too that I've covered before, but I'll just go through again because, you know, it's an important part of doing the sound design of this thing in general and making it work together well in a tune. Several different ways to sidechain. To demonstrate, I'll start with using just the stock Ableton, you know, compressors, like any compressor that you would use, the third-party VST or a FL, you know, compressor or anything, you know, they all are functioning basically the same, right? So I have them set as an external sidechain source here. And then I'm sending, in this case, I'm sidechaining them directly from the kick and from the snare here. But then as you see down here in the window, you can see how big and long, you know, the visual of the kick and snare are because it's sidechaining based on the signal directly from the kick snare instruments up here. So you can see what that looks like down here. And you know, you see that right there? See how it's reacting to the full kick sound, right? And so this long, thick kick that is quite loud, you know, for a period of time is triggering the compressor down for the entire time here. So that can work. That's not saying you can't sidechain directly from the source, from the kick, you know, or snare themselves. But I and many people like to use a separate signal. So instead of having a long, fat kick sound that is triggering your compressor, you can use just a trigger that is a very quick, precise, and a short trigger that's the same every time too, and will just trigger the compressor in a different way. You can see like when it was playing the two notes back to back here, you know, the two kicks back to back, you can see how it's triggering and the compressor isn't fully releasing, going back up to 0 in that case here. Like right there. Yeah, like right there, you know, you see? And that's because, yeah, the two long kicks back to back like that. So I'm going to use a trigger instead then to do that. And so one way to do it is to create copies of the MIDI pattern for the kick and the snare that I had. And then I have this preset operator here, a sidechain clicker that I have saved, that is just playing a very short noise burst. You can see here, it's a noise oscillator selected here. And then the envelope for it is initial, and rather than having the rise of the attack, I just have it set up, and then the decay here, well, it's actually the attack here because I'm just starting it with it directly playing. The attack then is being set at, say, you know, 22, something very short. So it's playing just this is a synth just playing a very short noise burst at full volume. And so it's not something you want to hear. You don't want to hear it in your mix, so I have the channel turned off. But I have it labeled sidechain kick, and then in the bass bus here with the same compressor setup, I can have that selected as the source, the sidechain kick here. And then you watch what that looks like compared to the actual kick itself. You can see this short noise burst, just this short click track trigger here, triggering the compressor. See what that looks like. And you can see there, it's giving us a much shorter sample to trigger the compressor with, or a much shorter source to trigger the compressor with. And it's always the same. It's just this little noise burst, little click sound. And like in that example, you could see the compressor has time to react and actually return back to full volume when it's the two kicks played back to back, like here. Now you can see there. And that just gives you a bit more precise control over things. So I have the same setup for the snare here as well, just another compressor with the snare. And that's one way to do it, using just an external noise like click source essentially in a basic compressor setup to sidechain. And then here I'm sidechaining the bass bus, right? So the bass is a lot more low. It's a lot more important to sidechain the kick in a sense to the bass, because the snare is mostly higher, mid and high frequencies, and a lot shorter of a noise, burst of sound. But the kick is a lot, longer of a sound, bigger sound, has more low frequency content to it that will clash more with the bass. So, generally speaking, you could be sidechaining the kick heavier in the bass than the snare. So in this case, you see I'm adjusting the threshold here, the threshold of that line there, to how much the compressor is activating for the kick track, or the kick, sidechain, and then the snare sidechain. Forgot to label that one. Sidechain snare. There we go. And so you see here I have the kick sidechaining quite a bit, and I'll adjust that, and I'll adjust the release time, because the release time is what is changing, how fast or slow the compressor is returning to full volume, and therefore shaping the relationship of the bass to the kick when it's sidechaining. So I'll play with that. You can see this. You can see the slope of it changing. If I make it really long. It fades in over a long time, and I have it just set something slow or something quick here, just a short return, so that it basically returns full volume right after the kick finishes. And then I have it set at threshold that's reacting in the way that I want, and ducking the sound, or turning the bass down almost completely, completely essentially for this passage. Or I could turn it down even all the way and make this a little bit shorter. And then the snare, I'm just doing it a little bit less aggressive. And you can hear, yeah, that works. There we go. We've got sidechaining going on. Sounds good. So another way to do that I also prefer to use too for additional control is by using some sort of volume shaping plugin, like a Shaperbox from Shaperbox, the volume tool in Shaperbox that I've shown before. And so this one's not receiving an audio click from this. It's not receiving these click tracks here. It's receiving just a MIDI track. So I just duplicated the kick and snare channels with the same pattern, same MIDI pattern on them, but just nothing on them, just blank, no instrument, no plugin, no nothing. And left them turned on, because then they're still sending a MIDI signal here. You can see lighting up. They're still sending a MIDI signal, and then I just have them set to send themselves to the destination, bass bus, Shaperbox plugin, the first one here. And then you can see it playing back in the window here. And then this gives you really precise control over, starting at full volume here and then ducking down to no volume here. And you can see in the window down here, I've talked about this before, but you can see in the window down here that you can see that milliseconds time, it just moves when I move the mouse. And so you can see I'm adjusting it there, 2 milliseconds, 3 milliseconds. Yeah, let's just do, 2.2 milliseconds of attack time for the volume reduction for the side chaining basically there. And then this here, this is out at 65, 66 milliseconds. Let's put it at 70 milliseconds, and then it starts to slope back up to full volume here. And I can adjust, the tail of that. So this gives you really precise control over the shape of the sidechain, of the sidechaining. And so this is just a really nice way I like to do sidechaining, because it gives you a visual, very precise control over shaping it here. And you can see the kick playing in the window there as it goes by. Yeah. So, and again, this is sidechaining for the kick, so I've got it set at 100%. So it's ducking the volume fully when this is engaging. And then for the snare, I have it, the snare trigger here, the snare trigger being sent to another one that is just doing it, a little bit, less aggressively, like half or something. You can see that. Yeah. So, yeah, I like this method of sidechaining because of the visual and precise nature of it, that it gives you very accurate control over it, and, with the visual like that. But any way that you find to do it is, whatever works well for you, and whatever plugins you want to use for it is, obviously fine. You just want to be sidechaining, the conflicting parts to each other. So the low bass of the kick and the sub, or the bass, for example, you have to properly sidechain. So now that we got that set up, and we got the, the bounce back and forth, you can hear the pump, kind of. Yeah. And then just to flesh out the tune a little more, I added some parts to it. I just added like some random vocal sample that's just like, I don't know, some random like blah, sound vocal sample thing here. And then just playing it at a high note with some delay, reverb, EQ on it. Just a synth playing the same notes, just in a wide patch here, just of two sounds, mixed together with filtering going on just to shape it, give it, movement and stuff. Yeah, and then a copy of it playing lower. Another vocal sample, some other random vocal sample. Yeah. You can see I'm doing EQing for that after the filter and delay. I'm just using the stock Ableton plugins here to demonstrate that. Because again, it's not about the plugins, it's about like what you're doing and why. And most, plugins they all do essentially the same thing for the, when they're the same tool. So, but here showing in the Ableton stock plugin. So here I've got the main EQ going on where I'm shaping. I'll click this button to make it bigger. I'm really reducing the the lower part of the sound, the mids and stuff here, and boosting the highs a little bit. And then in the other EQ, I'm using it in the side and mid-side mode here. So this mode, MS, for mid-side. And then I'm editing the side. Here's the middle, and here's the side mode. So in this case, I am reducing the information of the sides a little bit because it's after that delay and reverb. So the delay and the reverb gives a lot of side info, like a lot of the sound echoing on the sides, like the edges of this, the spectrum and stuff. And it's a way to control, just kind of reduce some of that, what you think of as basically the echo, of the reverb. So I have that on here. It's another way of adjusting and controlling the stereo information to just help your mix and stuff. So, but that's how you do that with like the stock Ableton plugin, for example. Like a lot of other plugins, for example, like the one I use a lot of Fab Filter has they just have that built in where I can change these two side or mid just in the same EQ window, and do that. But you can do the same thing with just the different, like two different Ableton EQs stacked together like this. Normally EQ mode is doing to both the mid and the side, right? It's doing it all together. It's mode. The mode is in stereo here, but then you can do separately in the mid side mode here, or in the left right where you're independently EQing the left or right channels. But that's more a specialized thing. So yeah, just reducing the sides a bit there. Goofy vocal sample, another goofier one, and yeah, stacked together. Yeah, in this case, you can hear the sound changing a lot. This one, just another copy of that bass that I made. I think this is the one with with the zero square, the real edgy. Yeah. Here, where I use that in combination with the high, and then change the macro of the timing of the rate of the LFO here, and really slowed it down, and that like breaks up the sound into quite a different. That's loud. Quite a different feeling there. Like, let's see. Yeah, and just you get really creative results by playing around with the timing of the LFOs that you're using to modulate those sounds. So yeah, that's essentially how you get really creative with it after you've created the bass foundation of the harmonic overtone bass sound, and begin to modulate those levels with an LFO that is looping at a certain rate, and by changing that rate, you get a lot of control over it, and that's how people are doing things like that, and automating, giving it like a slope or a movement, like a slope down or something, or like a tail, up or something, and towards the end kind of thing, and you get a different. Yeah, and you get all sorts of different results from that. So yeah, essentially that's it. It's a fun thing to play around with. And yeah, that idea of adding the harmonic high note overtone to it, to give that bass a lot of character, is a real common thing, and works for sure. So that's it basically. Yeah, otherwise, that's it. I mean, I have other side chaining. I have side chaining going on for the bass bus, but then everything else too, like all the other sounds. I've explained that before. It's generally how I would do things. Is I have the kick in, at least let's say in like aggressive dance music, stuff that's meant to be mixed loud and is for dance floor, like drum and bass, dubstep, etc., that kind of thing. I have the kick and the bass, or sorry, the kick and the snare separately, playing independent, so they can be loud and separate in the mix. And then everything else is being sidechained to it, essentially. Then the bass sounds in their own sidechain bus, getting their own aggressive, like fully sidechained to the kick shaping. And then everything else, every other sound, I just put it to another bus, another group, like just the sidechain bus in general. And then I'm doing sidechaining to it, but not as aggressive. It doesn't need to be fully sidechained to the kick like the bass does. And it's actually it's more sidechained to the snare, because like all the, again, like high sound, high information of the vocal samples and high synth and stuff like that is going to conflict more with the high frequency content of the snare. So that's, sidechained more to the snare drum here. And yeah, but again, not fully, just, enough that it's tucking it out of the way and not creating a conflict. And the side chaining amount is something done to taste, where you will get the sense if it's just like too aggressive of side chaining and the sound kind of really, cuts completely and is actually kind of disruptive. But yeah, that's basically it. So if you have any questions or any other things you want to go over on it, let me know. As always, I'm happy to discuss this kind of stuff. And yeah, this was fun. And definitely want to do some more bass design videos and stuff in the future. So yeah, thanks for joining in and see you next time.